Alright everyone, my name is Donovan. This is my OnePlus 6 that I've been using for about 2 weeks, and tonight I want to share with you my thoughts on, is this phone really worth all the hype that it's receiving in 2018? Let's get to it. Alright, so before we get too far into this video, let me just get this out of the way. This is a fantastic device and one that I would recommend to a lot of people because it is really a great device. And now that I have that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the price. Now, when OnePlus introduced its OnePlus One back in 2014, it introduced it with a very market disrupting price of $350. Now, fast forward to 2018 and the OnePlus 6 is being introduced at a price of $530. No longer necessarily the market disrupting price, but still a very fantastic price for a phone that has flagship specs and probably the fastest performance you're going to get out of any phone available to date. Alright, so now let's go ahead and talk about the build quality of the OnePlus 6, and as we can see, there is one major change from the OnePlus 5T over to the newer 6, and that is the backing. So we went from having a metal back with the OnePlus 5T over to a glass back, as you can see here with the OnePlus 6. Now, I have the midnight black version, and one thing you'll notice is that this one does not attract fingerprints like you will get with the mirror black version. It is also available in white as well. Now, on the front, one of the things that we'll notice as a major change from the 5T is that notch right there. So we have stretched out the display from 6 inches up to 6.2 and then introduced the notch. Now, honestly, the notch does not bother me even in the least bit because OnePlus has done a fantastic job. When you are in most apps, it will pretty much just cut out the notch except for your little notifications. So if you are somebody like me and you get a lot of notifications, you will notice that your notifications will not all fit up there, which is pretty common for me, but it is what it is. Now, the other difference between the OnePlus 5T and the 6 version is the button placement. So now on the left-hand side, so if we're facing the phone, on the left-hand side we have our volume rocker right over here, still very nice and clicky, and then over here we have our power button and our alert slider over here versus over here on the top where it used to be on every other OnePlus device that I've owned. Alright, so now let's go ahead and talk about the performance of the OnePlus 6, and it probably goes without saying that the OnePlus 6 is a very fast phone. So this has the Snapdragon 845 processor, and you can get it with either 6 gigs or 8 gigs of RAM. I happen to have the 8 gigs of RAM version with 128 gigs of onboard storage. It is also available in 64 and 256 gig variants as well. So you can see here the Geekbench scores 2455 for the single core score, and a multi-core score of 9099. And what that means in real life is pretty much everything you throw at this phone, it can handle no problem whatsoever. It is a blazing fast phone, whether it be gaming, social media, pretty much everything you throw at this phone, it will be able to handle with pretty much ease. Alright, so now let's go ahead and talk about the software on the OnePlus 6. And again, this is an area where OnePlus really shines, really for two reasons. Number one, Oxygen OS, and that is the skin on top of Android that comes with every OnePlus device. So you can see here that we have Oxygen OS 5.1.5 on top of Android 8.1, and what makes it so great is all of the customizations that is built into this software system. So here we go, here's our section of customizations. So I'm just going to show you a few of them that I think are really useful. So we'll go ahead and turn the screen off. One of them being that if I draw a V, I can turn the flashlight on. Now that's completely customizable. You can change that to whatever you want it to do, so it can open an app, it can do things like turn on flashlights. You can also make it open the camera. So I use O for opening the camera, so that's another option as well. So that's in the gesture section. Another gesture I have set up is 3-finger screenshot. That's really useful also, but all kinds of different customizations that are just super useful. And if I could pick any one skin on top of Android, it would definitely be Oxygen OS. Now, that's the first reason. Number two is they give historically very regular updates to their software, which is definitely a very good thing in my opinion. All right, so now let's go ahead and talk about the cameras on the OnePlus 6, because that's definitely an area that OnePlus has marketed as being improved over previous iterations of this device. And I just want to start out by saying I think that the cameras are very good. I don't think that they're great. That's just me being completely honest in my opinion. So let's talk about these cameras. So we have a 16 and 20 megapixel camera on the rear, both at f1.7 aperture. Now, one thing that we do have versus previous versions is we do have optical image stabilization on the rear cameras. We do also have electronic image stabilization. So the difference there being when you're shooting at 30 frames per second, it's going to use electronic image stabilization, and then when you use 60 frames per second for video, it's going to use optical image stabilization. So I will be honest with you and say that the optical image stabilization really is kind of useless. It just doesn't look all that great in my opinion, and I'll show you some samples of that here in just a moment. Now, on the front we have a 16 megapixel selfie shooter right up here on the notch, and that's going to give you electronic image stabilization as well. So now let's go ahead and go into the camera app itself. So we can see here that if we go into video, I'll slide into video, that we do have 4K, if I can slide into it, there we go. And we are able to shoot here in 60 frames per second at 4K, so that is fantastic. When I go over here, we also have our photos. So in photos, we can shoot, of course, up to 20 megapixels, and then we have our portrait mode as well. So that's going to give us that depth effect, which I think works very well on this device. And then over here, if we slide over to the right, you can see here we have a few shooting options. So we have the introduction of slow motion at 480 frames per second. So if I go here into slow motion, you can see down here we have 1080p at 240 frames per second, or if I come up here, we have 720p at 480 frames per second. So that is super slow-mo that they've introduced on here. We do also have our pro mode, time-lapse, and then also panorama. So I do like that they have all of these options, shooting options available in this device, but I will say that the camera quality has been very good. Not quite flagship quality, not quite up to the Samsung Galaxy S9, S9 Plus, or even the Pixels of last year. So now let's go ahead and talk about battery life on the OnePlus 6. So let me just get this out of the way. Battery life is going to vary depending on how you use your device, but I can just tell you from my perspective that the battery life has been pretty decent, but not great on the OnePlus 6 so far. So this has a 3300 milliamp hour battery. That is the same size battery you got on the OnePlus 5T. Now, what does that mean in terms of real world usage? Well, I'll go ahead and share you just what I have today. So you can see it's 2:24 a.m. So it's very late, but I've got 3 hours and 49 minutes of screen on time, and I think it's at right now 13% battery life. So what I can say is this: in general, I've been getting about 5 to 6 hours pretty consistently of screen on time. Now that's going to be a little bit less today because I didn't have the screen on a whole lot. I was listening to a lot of music with the screen off, so I was using a lot of battery up without actually having the screen on. But in general, I'm finishing most days with about 20% battery life. And even if you don't get through a full day, you do always have dash charging, which is still one of the fastest ways to charge up any device, maybe outside of Huawei devices. Some of the Huawei flagship devices do charge really fast, but the dash charging with OnePlus is still definitely one of the fastest ways to charge any device. Alright, so now let's go ahead and talk about 3 things that OnePlus did not include in the OnePlus 6. So number 1 being wireless charging. So even though they introduced a glass back which would have allowed for wireless charging, unfortunately they did not include wireless charging with the OnePlus 6. So I think that's a little bit of a misstep. It would have been nice. While I don't use wireless charging all that often, it's still something I think that they probably should have included with the OnePlus 6. Number 2 being dual speakers. So this one has just a single bottom firing speaker right down here, and while I do like the sound of that single speaker, it would be nice to have dual speakers, because dual speakers are always better than single speakers 99.9% of the time. So that's number 2. And number 3 being water resistance. So this technically does have a nano coating, which means that you probably aren't going to have any issue with getting it wet. If you just get it damp, or if you splash it, probably no issues whatsoever. However, there is no official IP rating with the OnePlus 6 like you get with most of its competition, like the Samsungs, the Pixels, the iPhones. They all have water resistance, either IP67 or 68 certification, and unfortunately that's something that they didn't include with the OnePlus 6. Alright, so now it's time for my final thoughts on the OnePlus 6, and let me answer that question that I asked right at the beginning of this video. Is this thing worth all the hype that it received in 2018? And my short answer to that is not really. No, I don't really think this phone is really worthy of all the hype it's receiving. The main reason I say that is because I really see the OnePlus 6 as a pretty incremental upgrade from the OnePlus 5T. Now, that happens to be kind of what we're getting in 2018 up to this point, is a lot of incremental upgrades in most devices. The OnePlus 5T is still a very fantastic device, and so is the OnePlus 6. In fact, I love the OnePlus 6. I think it's a great device. It's one I would definitely recommend to anybody and everybody that's thinking about getting a brand new phone. This is a device that is very good. However, I'm not really sure it was worthy of all the hype it received, kind of like most iPhone releases. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.